Hello, everybody. My name is Eduardo Lopez, and thank you for coming to my presentation. I work for the UCLA Teacher Education Program, and we are a two-year program in which candidates receive their preliminary credential in the first year and work full-time as teachers in the second year while they're working on their master's. We have a commitment to Los Angeles Unified School District and are guided by a particular set of social justice principles. These principles include cultivating teachers that are going to be knowledgeable and passionate about the content that they teach, understand that teaching has moral, political, and ethical dimensions, that they have to be reflective of the teaching, about their teaching and the practices that they engage in, the ability to connect practice with theory and theory with practice, and leverage the assets in the communities in which they teach. I've been teaching a year-long course for candidates in the second year of the program when they're working as full-time teachers. The course is intended to support the development of these teachers in terms of their professional, intellectual, and ethical identities. And in that process, teachers engage in an inquiry process. And so today, what I wanted to do is I wanted to share my story of how this project has been evolving over the 15 years that I have been working at UCLA. And my story then begins when I first arrived at UCLA. I was assigned a group of 5 candidates to support their inquiry projects. And if you would have been able to see inside my head in terms of my understandings of inquiry, this is what you've seen, a big question mark. I had never heard of the word inquiry. I didn't know what that meant or it entailed to support candidates in that process. And I therefore just relied on my previous work doing my dissertation and the work advisor had done in terms of giving feedback on drafts, giving them articles to support their topics that they were writing about. But that was pretty much the extent of my thinking about what inquiry was. The following year, I was given a group of 28 teachers that I had to support. And I felt the pressure then to be able to be more knowledgeable about that process. So I began to read a number of works. And one of the pieces that I found really useful was this book by Marilyn Cochran Smith and Susan Lytle, Inside Outside, Teacher Research and Knowledge. And for the first time, I had a definition to understand what teacher research was about. And I really liked their definition that said it was systematic and intentional inquiry about teaching, learning, and schooling carried out by teachers in their own school and classrooms. And the book also gave me a history about action research and the growth of teacher research in the 80s. And so I began to feel more comfortable about what that process was like. And so I developed a methodology that helped guide the projects that I was working with my students. And so that first piece that they had to do was candidates had to develop a question that they were passionate about, that they wanted to understand about their teaching, about working with the students, or in the context of the school in which they were working in. And then they had to rethink about that question and then ask themselves if the question was thinking about challenging educational inequality. And if it didn't, how can they change that question to be able to address those issues? And when they landed on the question, then they engaged in the process of keeping a teacher journal in which they kept observations and reflections about their teaching. As they gained more skills in doing those observations, then I also asked them to identify theories that help to illuminate or help to understand their experiences. When they had a deeper sense of what was occurring and of those interactions with students, then I asked them to develop an action plan. And in the action plan, they had to develop specific steps that they believe would be able to address the challenges that they were experiencing. And in addition to those steps, they also had to be able to identify data to be collected. Once they did that, they implemented the action plan, and along the way, they collected data. Once the action plan was finished, then they would go back to that data, analyze it, and then come up with the conclusions to be able to assess the efficacy of their action plan. And then finally, they presented these findings at the end of the year in a conference where they invited family, friends, staff members to come and listen to their findings. Overall, this process teachers enjoyed and they found it very useful. And in fact, this was something that, for example, that a general feeling that's candidates shared. And this is just one candidate's reflection about what it was like for her. And she said, the inquiry process had truly helped me be the teacher that I am today, the person I am today. It has given me a foundation in which I'm able to build on an experiment. It provides me with hope in a world of hopelessness. Inquiry has given me the courage to push back against the hegemonic structures of the school system. Inquiry has forced me to reflect upon my practice and truly create transformational change in my classroom. It has helped me to understand that change comes from within, and no matter the circumstances we are up against, with inquiry, reflection, and action, I can and will fit the good fight. So this process I continued to do until the UCLA began to adopt a ethnic studies pathway in 2015. And in this pathway of ethnic studies teachers, they were being guided by a similar but different set of principles, which some of which were taken from the work of Alexia Reyes McGovern and Tracy Buenavista's work, where they outlined the 4 tenets of ethnic studies pedagogy. And in their work, they identified the first one as question white supremacist notions of ideological objectivity and neutrality in the process of knowledge construction, move towards its anti-essentialist representation of racialized communities, develop and practice a community-grounded praxis in the teaching of content, and foster opportunities for individual empowerment and collective self-determination and social transformation. So I wanted to think about a process then that was aligned with the group then that I was going to begin to work with, which was this ethnic studies pathway. At the same time, I was invited to be part of a dissertation committee of a student who was from Loyola Marymount, who was working on his dissertation and was using autoethnography as the methodology for his dissertation. And so similarly before, where I just had never heard it, I just jumped in and began to read and try to understand it as much as I could in order to support this candidate. And in that process, I came across this book called The Ethnographic Eye, a methodological novel about autoethnography by Caroline Eilis. And her name kept coming up in a lot of the readings that I was doing. And I just found this book really beautiful because I was expecting it to be written as a traditional academic book, but instead it was written, as the name suggests, as a novel. And so in this book, she writes from a very dramatic narrative about her year teaching a course and working with doctoral students on the autoethnographic projects. And so I saw students as characters in the story. And so it was a very beautifully written and very interesting way to present the material. And in that process, I began to learn and have a better understanding that autoethnography was a qualitative writing research method that connects personal experiences to political, cultural, and social context. And I really liked that because I thought it was aligning itself really well with the ethnic studies pedagogy. And I also liked some of the features of autoethnography. While there isn't a consensus, here are just some of those distinguishing features. And the first is that autoethnographers position themselves as storytellers. And that is that they take from, for example, autobiography, those elements of writing in first person, giving detailed descriptions of events, and also devices from storytelling, such as dialogue, narrative, and plot, in order to identify formative events or events that give the authors some kind of epiphany. The other part is that it's also taking tools from ethnography, and so they're interested in giving thick descriptions. And so in this process, just like ethnographers, they're interested in developing these descriptions of events in order to understand what is the meaning or the significance of these events in relationship to the interactions of people in the context. Third, they're familiar with existing theory and research. So that is, that they have to know the body of research and be able to talk about it in the way that it's connecting to the larger pool of theory and research. So it's not just about their own individual experiences, but contextualize into this larger body of research and theory. And finally, that these texts are written in very creative forms. So as was mentioned in the beginning, that they're positioning themselves as storytellers. They're using narrative. They're pushing back against traditional ways that academics are writing. So they're integrating poetry, they're integrating photographs, drawings, song, and presenting it in a way that it reaches a wider audience. So I really liked that, and I began to think about how I can integrate this into the projects we were doing at UCLA. And so I began to think and develop a critical teacher autoethnography here at UCLA. And so this project is done over 3 quarters. And the first part comes in the fall quarter, where they're doing 2 overarching objectives. And so the first part is thinking about their past experiences and identifying moments that shaped their identities as teachers. And then transitioning to their present context where they're currently working in, and to be able to think about how that context is shaping and influencing and mediating their identities. So this is what it looks like in terms of the projects that they're doing. I asked them then this larger question about what shaped, influenced me into the teacher I am today. And I asked them to think about 2 values and beliefs. And so what are 2 values and beliefs that you think are significant about your teaching? And what are those moments that shaped it or that led you to believe that those were important? I then asked them to write a letter to an educator, and I defined educator broadly, not just a K-12 teacher or a college professor, but it could be a grandma, it could be a neighbor, it could be a friend, and they have to write them a letter and talk to them about how they influenced them in terms of their identities as students or teachers, and how that experience influenced them in their current teaching context. And then finally identify a text that influenced against their teachers' identities or their teaching practice. And similarly, as the educator, I define text broadly, not just to say it's a book or a journal article, but it could be a film, it could be a song. So broadly thinking about a text that has influenced them. So here's just some examples of what this looks like. So on the left hand, you see a former student who rethought an entry and designed it as in a notebook. And so you also see, for example, the integration of photographs and original drawings. Another candidate here is one of the snapshots of the values and beliefs on the left hand side, the trail of empathy, where she learns about the importance of empathy during the middle school hike. And then the same student also then created a postcard which she mailed to her former teacher. So then I say, okay, so these are the values and beliefs or the experiences that have influenced you. And we bring these into a school. And so now what I want you to do is I want you to identify a class as a focus class. And so for me, I'm working with secondary teachers. I asked them to pick one period and then describe what that is like to be working with those young people. So what are their strengths and what are the challenges that they're experiencing? And in the winter, I says, okay, so now you're going to take this knowledge about your students, and I want you to develop a unit that you think is going to integrate and leverage student strengths, but also maybe address some of the challenges that you're experiencing. And then you're going to describe 2 moments teaching that unit. So then students were using backwards planning principles. They identify guiding questions, essential questions. They create the assessments, and then they create the daily lessons for that unit. And then they implement it. And along the way, I said, okay, what you're going to do is you're going to you're going to describe 2 moments, one from the beginning of the unit and the other one from the middle. And so these descriptions are going to allow the reader to enter into your classroom and feel and experience what it's like to not just teach the unit, but to be able to work with that young group of students. So here is just another example of someone who is writing about their experiences during the first week of the unit. and then they drew an image of one of the students in that class. And then finally, at the end in the spring quarter, I asked them to just simply describe one last moment in teaching of the unit, and then they reflect on the areas of strength, they identify areas of growth, and then they create an action plan. And so what that means is then they just write one more description and one more snapshot of in the final week of the unit. And they describe how it is and where it ended and what those experiences like. And then they look at themselves, not just thinking about that particular unit, but overall during the year, and ask themselves, well, what were my strengths as a teacher that I developed and how did I leverage them? But also, where are areas of growth that I need to work on? And what are the resources that I need to find in order to help me address these areas of growth that I'm identifying? So here's just one student who imagined the action plan as a product manual, where she's identifying specific steps as in a manual to take and address these areas of growth. So this is a quick overview of the critical teacher autoethnography projects that we're doing here at UCLA. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation.